Yes, we're back, and I have pulled up on my phone here all of the fights. It's a pretty good looking card thus far. As I stated, there has been a few weird things transpire, which means I think Bobby Green was supposed to fight Jim Miller, right? That got canceled, and so Donald Cerrone, who was supposed to fight Joe Lozon a couple weeks ago, stepped in. And now that fight is at 170, which is interesting. Jim Miller, Donald Cerrone fought a few years back, and Donald Cerrone, I think, knocked him out with a head kick. They both have just like a stupid amount of fights in the UFC. They both have 16 losses. I saw a meme, it was like, somebody's 16 has got to go, and that made me laugh. Lauren Murphy and Miesha Tate were supposed to fight. That was Miesha Tate's first fight down at strawweight. That has also been canceled because I think Lauren Murphy had a foot injury or something. It was announced last night on the broadcast. So we're opening up the card with, let's see, Jessica Rose Clark is fighting Julia Stalinco, and if I had to guess, I think this is supposed to be the UFC trying to give one back for Jessica Rose Clark, kind of see where she's at, because she's Australian. There's a lot of people that like her quite a bit. A lot of thirsty dudes out there who enjoy her and watching her fight and stuff. I'm not necessarily one of them. I think she's a pretty talented fighter. She's been doing a lot more like grappling things lately, which is interesting, to say the least. She definitely has some size issues, though. I think for a bantamweight, like, she's pretty strong. She's like, I think she's a power lifter, or she dabbles in powerlifting, but she's very short for the weight class. I think every time I see her, I'm like, I think she's a strawweight, but she's actually a bantamweight, which is interesting. So I'm gonna say that she's probably gonna win because, well, she should win. If she doesn't, I think that's not a good look for her. She's 34, and bantamweight's like not that stacked of a division, women's bantamweight at least. So it would not be a good look if she was not able to get that win. That being said, her opponent is also, I think, lost her last like 2 or 3 fights. So yeah, I don't know. She's a Lithuanian though, so that's interesting. Next up is Brad Tavares fighting Dracus Duplicis. Dracus Duplicis, I think his name is. Dude looks just like a brick shithouse. He had a few fights that he was supposed to have with Kelvin Gastelum, and I think he was slated to fight Andre Muniz as well. Both of those got canceled. So he's got 2 wins, 2 knockouts in the UFC thus far at middleweight, and he's fighting Brad Tavares. Brad Tavares is just kind of one of those guys. He wins, he loses, he beats a lot of guys, he loses to like the best guys pretty much. He has a lot of really good wins. He's got, even his losses are pretty good, to be honest. They stack up pretty well. So it's always interesting to see him back out there. I don't really know what to say about this one. It's interesting. I think Brad Tavares is very good, so I'll say Brad Tavares might lose. I do think it'll go to a decision though, because Brad Tavares is really hard to get out of there. Anyway, next up, women flyweight. Jessica Ai taking on Macy Barber. I think this was supposed to be Jessica Ai was supposed to take on like Cynthia Calvillo, or no, that was a different fight. She was supposed to take on somebody else, but then Macy Barber stepped in. So this will be a very interesting fight for Macy Barber because Jessica Ai fought for the title 2 years ago, thereabouts. She got just absolutely conked in the head by Valentina Shivchenko, and Valentina Shivchenko's very first title defense, if I remember correctly. Wasn't especially close beforehand. Jessica Ai has kind of traded wins and losses since then. Most recently, if I remember correctly, she got walloped in the head by somebody, and got like a giant cut, abrasion, in the middle of her forehead. It looked like she unlocked her third eye, which is kind of funny to think about. Macy Barber is coming off of a win, I believe, against Miranda Maverick. I think she had another fight since then, so I shouldn't say that, but let's double check this. I'm not completely mistaken. Macy Barber was gifted a win, I should say, against Miranda Maverick. But no, she's coming off of a really boring win over Montana De La Rosa, which was basically just clinching up and foot stomping. It was really kind of inconsequential. Macy Barber is supposed to be like the future. She lost to Roxanne Modafferi, blew out her leg doing it, and then proceeded to destroy the air 3 feet in front of Alexa Grasso. She was like throwing mad combos to the air, but Alexa Grasso is a pretty smooth operator in the boxing range and kind of took care of it. So I'm not really too enthralled with the idea of this fight. I do think that Jessica Ai is a little bit closer to the end of the career than she is to the beginning. So I'm going to say that oh, she fought Jennifer Maia, got her face absolutely stomped in. I'm going to say that Macy Barber probably beats Jessica Ai. That's my thought, at least. Uriah Hall then taking on Andre Muniz. Andre Muniz was supposed to fight Kelvin Gastelum. Gastelum got injured, or Muniz got injured, or something. Something weird happened there. And yeah, now they are... Uriah Hall's fighting him. Uriah Hall is kind of a weird fighter. He was kind of touted to be the next big thing, but never really, I don't know, amounted to that. And he was going on a run, like 2020, mid 2020, and he beat Anderson Silva, which was like the big deal because everyone's like, oh, he's finally gonna. That was like his thing, coming up through the Ultimate Fighter. It was like, this is finally the guy that's gonna beat Anderson Silva. Never really got that opportunity until Anderson Silva was like 1 foot out the door. It was a weird fight. That was Halloween night. Weird. That was a weird one. And then he went on to fight Chris Weidman, broke Chris Weidman's leg, which was pretty gnarly. Got to see that live, which is fun. And then, yeah, got kind of boxed up by Sean Strickland, which was really just as boring as it sounds. So Andre Muniz famously broke Jacare's arm. Jacare being like a really good grappler, Andre Muniz apparently being a little bit better grappler. So kind of interesting to see how that one played out. And if you had to, I don't know, if I had to guess, I would say that Uriah Hall throws way too much stuff that makes no real sense, and Muniz is a little bit more calculated, and I think his grappling and effective grappling outweighs Uriah Hall's flashy striking. So I'm going to say that Andre Muniz is probably going to get the W, but I don't know. I'm not big on the Uriah Hall is the truth freight train. I don't see that with his performances. He's pretty gun shy from what I've seen, and this is just like most recently and stuff. Like he has flashes of brilliance, as do a lot of people, but I don't know. It's just, I never feel like super confident when I watch him fight. I'm never like, oh yeah, he's obviously going to win this. I always like feel like there's a greater chance of him losing it than winning it. And also he just like, he seems like he's annoying. Like every time he's like calling people out and stuff, they're like, stop, please. It's embarrassing. But anyway, that should be an interesting fight. That is the end of the early prelims. So on the prelims themselves, there is quite a lot. So there's Jim Miller versus Donald Cerrone at welterweight, not at lightweight, which is interesting. And to be honest, I don't really have a whole lot of thoughts on this. Jim Miller's been looking really good lately. He's been fighting a lot of like up-and-comers at 155. Donald Cerrone's been not looking so good. He's been fighting, let's see, I think he last fought at welterweight. His last few fights have been at welterweight. So hopefully the weight cut does him some good. He has kind of talked about 2 more fights and then he's pretty much done. He wants to have 50 fights, I think, in the UFC, or no, not 50 fights in the UFC, but just 50 fights. Something crazy like that. It's just insane to think about. Imagine getting, like, punched in the head. So much. But anyway. Jim Miller has not really talked about retirement, at least as much as I've heard. I think he's a very phenomenal fighter. His last few wins have been by knockout, which has been very surprising. But I still think that Donald Cerrone beat him all those years ago. It was not especially close from what I remember. And I don't have a hard time imagining that is what will happen again, personally. So if I had to guess, I would say that Donald Cerrone probably comes back in with another win, but also Donald Cerrone was training to fight Joe Lozon. Then he had to pull out back in May because of food poisoning, and then Joe Lozon's knee locked up, so he had to pull out his last fight a few weeks ago. So we'll be interested in seeing how that plays out. But I'm going to say Cerrone, just because I kind of hope he wins. Next up is Ian Gary taking on Gabe Green. I know nothing about Gabe Green. Let's see if I can... Yeah, he's had... Okay, yeah, so this is basically who Gabe Green is. He's going to be the guy that probably gives Ian Gary a little bit of a tougher time, but ultimately will lose. Ian Gary, they're kind of hoping to build him up as a big prospect. He's only fought on pay-per-view so far. UFC 268 was his first fight against Jordan Williams, got the knockout in the first round. UFC 273 against Darian Weeks, and that was a full decision. So it was a pretty good fight, if I remember correctly. And then this fight against Gabe Green at UFC 276. I'm going to say Ian Gary's probably going to win, just because he's like 6'3" at 170, which is pretty insane. He's got really good striking. He also definitely has an advantage when it comes to skin infection. In his first fight in the UFC, he's got this like giant cold sore, and he's like hugging Joe Rogan in the post-fight interview and stuff. It was really funny to look at. It was also kind of gross. I don't know. But that should be a decent little fight. Next up, I believe, is Robbie Lawler. Yep, Robbie Lawler, Brian Barberina. It is a crime. It is an absolute crime that this fight is on the prelims. I'm upset. Big Robbie Lawler fan, for me personally. Love the guy. Even though like his last few fights have not been fantastic, I still very much enjoy watching him fight. Hey, we have success relative. I'm so smart. Anyway, his few fights have been not great. He's, I think, 40 now. So just looking a little bit older, but still, just like, he's just one of those guys you just want to get a beer with, you know? But more so than that, like, he just seems like he just shows up, fights, and goes home. And I really respect that. All of his interviews, it's especially when he was champion, it's just like, they feel so forced. He's got that one video where some interviewer was talking to him about Conor McGregor potentially popping up to 170 when he was champion to fight him for the championship.
Did you want the rumored Conor McGregor fight to happen?
I wasn't too worried about it. Obviously that was a big fight. He's a big draw, but wouldn't have been good for him.
How so?
Because if I hurt him, I wasn't taking his neck.
What were you gonna take?
His soul.
Robbie Lawler, what a hero. He's fighting Brian Barberina, which Brian Barberina just fought Matt Brown not too long ago. It was a fun little scrap, and Matt Brown was saying something about like, oh, I think he was thinking that he won. I love Matt Brown, but I think Brian Barberena did enough to win. Brian Barberena is just a fun little scrapper, so it's tough. It's tough. I really hope that whatever happens, it's a good fight. I'm gonna say, realistically, I think Brian Barberena is gonna win, but I hope that Robbie Lawler wins. And also, it makes me sad that it's on the prelims. And then next up, the headliner of the prelims is Brad Riddell versus Jalen Turner, and that is going to be good. It's at lightweight, which is 155, and it's just a spoil of riches in that weight class. Brad Riddell's coming off his first loss in the UFC against Rafael Fiziev. Jalen Turner coming off a really good showing against Jamie Malarkey. I'm going to go with Brad Riddell, though. I just think Brad Riddell's striking is pretty much next level. He trains with Israel Adesanya, who we'll talk about later, and I just think he's able to move in on bigger people and rip to the body a lot more effectively. He's got really good Muay Thai striking, but that should be a really good fight. I'm looking forward to it. Opening up the main card, I believe, is Sean O'Malley versus Pedro Munoz. This one's going to be interesting because Sean O'Malley is a pretty good striker. Got a lot of flashy techniques, but he's also very good with the fundamentals, jab, 1-2, good stuff like that. Pedro Munoz, on the other hand, is interesting because he's always like, he will show signs of brilliance, right? But he's also prone to just getting in dogfights and losing. So it's really always kind of a toss-up. But there is one thing. They both are susceptible to each other's. They both have weaknesses that are susceptible to the other's strengths. So Sean O'Malley has in the past shown a propensity to be fragile, weak, so to speak. His one loss was to Chito Vera, who, I don't remember, like kicked him in the nerve or something like that, and his leg just went limp. He also broke his ankle or something like that in the middle of a fight, and then famously had to do the interview from the ground. But Pedro Munoz, on the other hand, has pretty phenomenal leg kicks. We saw that against Jimmy Rivera, and they fought last year, I think it was. Even against Dominic Cruz, when they fought. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I don't know, big step up for Sean O'Malley. Good for Pedro's exposure. I'm gonna go with, if I had to guess, which is basically all I'm doing, because I'm not watching tape or anything for any of this, this is just me speculating. I don't know. I think that Sean will be able to keep him out on the outside enough that Pedro can't move in, because there is a pretty significant reach advantage for O'Malley. I think he will be able to exploit. So we'll say that that's it. I think that Sean will probably take that. Next up, it is getting warm in my room. We have Lauren Murphy, Miesha Tate. That was, I think, pulled, so we won't talk about that, but it is a shame and it is a crime that was on the main card as opposed to Robbie Lawler. I understand where Robbie Lawler was at in his career, but still, give the man some respect. Next up is Sean Strickland taking on Alex Pereira. Sean Strickland, 25-3. Alex Pereira, whatever the fuck, is 5-1 in MMA. I don't know who's won losses against, but I think it was a grappling deal. And yeah, he's had 2 fights, I think, in the UFC. Alex Perez, very famous kickboxer, famously beat Israel Adesanya twice and knocked him out 1 time, I believe it was. I've not watched those fights. I don't really have too much interest in kickboxing, but apparently he's really good at it. I don't know. I'm interested to see how well his game carries over to MMA against like the higher level guys. And they're the UFC's kind of setting it up against Sean Strickland, who is a relatively good boxer in terms of defensive boxer. He's very good at slowing down the fight, and he's got a really weird output. Nothing's really going to hurt you. It's all cumulative. It's all kind of like building up. I don't really like Sean Strickland as a person. I think he's pretty gross. He just says inflammatory things to say inflammatory things. People have said like, oh, he's actually a pretty nice guy, this, that, and the other. And it's kind of like, yeah, for sure, he might be awesome, but by saying those things, you're propagating that response. I don't know. And I get that that's kind of how everything's been gamed, so to speak, in MMA. Is that like whoever says the zaniest stuff gets the most exposure. But I just don't really care for any of that. I just want to watch people fight. So sometimes he'll say stuff I'm just like, man, what do you stop? This is weird. And also his fights are just not interesting. Like, I don't really enjoy him as a person or him as a fighter, so I'm good. I hope that I don't know. Anyway, that being said, though, I do think that Alex Pereira's like boxing will be enough to kind of quell whatever offensive output Strickland has. And yeah, that's kind of my thought moving into it. It's just that Strickland's not going to have much to really show for it. That is unless, of course, he like throws in some takedowns and stuff like that and threatens that. Then I don't know. It's an interesting fight for sure. They're obviously trying to fast track Alex Pereira to fight Adesanya. So I'm gonna say him. I think he'll probably win. I think his striking is pretty high caliber, much more high caliber than Strickland's. And I think unless Strickland like right from the get-go threatens takedowns, grappling exchanges, I don't think that it's going to be all that close of a fight, but I'm interested to see it, I guess. And then the co-main event is Bulkanovsky versus Holloway. This is the 3rd time they're fighting, and the first 2 were pretty close. And Max Holloway at that time, I think that was his, let's see, it was Ortega, Edgar, well, there was Aldo, Ortega, Edgar. So I think Volkanovski was his 4th title defense. Yeah. And lost the decision, mostly due to Volkanovski's leg kicks and superior striking. Max was trying to walk him down, and Volk was doing a good job of getting out of the way. All of that. Second fight was much closer. I think Max dropped him, and then Volkanovski really picked up on the wrestling. Who do I think is going to win this 3rd one? It really depends upon what kind of changes each of them have made to their games. They've both fought twice since then. Holloway put on just a brutal, that was a tough fight to watch. His fight against Calvin Kattar, it was just, it was hard to watch. And then he fought Yair Rodriguez, which was more challenging for Max, but still like incredibly impressive. Yair at that point, I think, had been out for a while. Google this. I'm curious. Okay, so Holloway and Yair Rodriguez fought in November of last year. Yair previously fought, his last fight was in 2019. Yes, that was almost a 2-year layoff. And then he pushed Max Holloway to a decision in the 5th round. And it was not especially close from what I recall, but regardless, it was still a very impressive showing. Max looked a lot more beat up than he did in the Kattar fight, so I think that should be taken into account. Bulkanovsky fought twice as well. He fought against Brian Ortega, which, you know, whatever. I don't really like Ortega that much. I think he's a little bit overblown. That's just my opinion, but whatever. I digress. So they fought. Wasn't especially close, especially in like the later rounds. Volk pretty much just mopped the floor with them, got out of the 2 pretty convincing submission attempts by Ortega, and then just pummeled him completely, not really closely, which was awesome. It was cool to watch because I like Volkanovski. I like his striking style and stuff. Then he fought Chan Sung Jung, which was also pretty tough to watch because that was supposed to be him fighting. Volk was supposed to fight Max the 3rd time on that card. Did not happen for reasons. But Crane Zabi stepped up at the relative last minute. I don't remember when that was, but he stepped up and just kind of got destroyed by Volkanovski. So I think that just kind of goes to show that really the takeaway for me, and I think for most people, is that Volkanovski and Holloway are like just steps above of the rest of the division, which is why they're fighting for the 3rd time, even though Max lost the first 2 times they fought. Just they're like the number 1 and number 2. So I think that Volk takes this 3rd fight, and I don't think it's going to be as close. I think he might employ a little bit more wrestling, maybe. I don't know. I don't know what they do with their free time, but I'm very interested to see it. I think Volkanovski wins, and I think he moves up to lightweight to challenge whoever wins the title there. Moving on to the main event, which is Izzy Adesanya, something like that, taking on Jared Cannonier. I love Jared Cannonier. He used to fight at heavyweight. I'm very interested to see the fight. I think that I don't know how I think. Izzy Adesanya, this is his, let's see. So he won the title. Then he beat Yoel Romero, beat Paulo Costa. Then he beat Marvin Vettori for his 2nd time. Then he beat Whitaker. This will be his 5th defense, which is interesting in and of itself. And he's taking on someone new, which is nice because I think his last 2 fights were rematches. He did have that loss to Jan Blachowicz, but that was up at 205, so he's still undefeated at middleweight. And I don't know. I think this fight will be good. So I think that Cannonier's been really, since that loss to Whitaker, I think he's really been putting it together in a way that will impress a lot of people. I think his boxing is looking a lot better, but I think he's still susceptible to kind of charging forward. And I think that Izzy can take that forward momentum and really exploit that movement and kind of break away and strike while moving. Kind of like kind of like how somebody would with a bull, you know. Izzy's last few performances have been bland, according to some, which I don't blame because they've been very technical, very lackluster in terms of output, but he wins, so, you know, can't be mad about that. I think he's a counter striker. There's that. So he's kind of going off of what is given to him, and I think that I think Cannonier will give him a lot to deal with, and I think that he will move from there to show a lot more, if that makes sense. Yeah, I think this is the same situation. I think middleweight and featherweight are kind of in the same situation in terms of there's a very, very, very clear 1 and 2, and I think everyone else is just like a little bit below that to a lot below that. So I have a really hard time picking Cannonier, although I do think it will be a good fight. I think that Izzy's going to win, poisonally. Cannonier does have probably a power advantage, but if you can't get a clean hit on somebody, it doesn't really matter. We'll see. I don't know, those are my thoughts though. I've been a big fan of Izzy for a minute. I watched his fights on the come up against Brad Tavares, against Rob Wilkinson, which was his first fight in the UFC, and his knockout of Brunson is probably one of my favorite things to watch. We will see. We will see where it goes. So yeah, my picks, my thoughts: Izzy, Volkanovski, then Pereira, Sean O'Malley, Brad Riddell. I'm going to say Robbie Lawler, even though I don't think he's going to. Robbie Lawler. Holding out hope. Putting it out there. Donald Cerrone, Macy Barber, Ian Gary, Andre Muniz, Dracus, Duplicis, and Jessica Rose Clark. Those are my thoughts. We will see, though. I'm not 1,000% sure about any of them, but it'll be a good thing of fights, and maybe I'll talk about it more to kind of hype it up some more, because I do have a lot of stuff to repair and always need stuff to talk about. So let me know if you enjoyed this video. I did want to talk about this because that's kind of the main point of this video. Determined that the speed resistor here may or may not be at fault, so I'm just going to have to line that up and make sure that that is indeed the issue. But it is very uncomfortable in my room right now because it's like 90 degrees outside. And there's no air conditioning, so it just feels very muggy. So I'm going to go kind of cool off a bit and then get back to work. So thank you for watching. As always, appreciate it. I'll catch you on the next one.